Welcome. I'm your host, Mark Graziano, and this is the GRC Podcast. This is your source for discussions about governance, risk, compliance, and more. I partner with incredible security champions to challenge the GRC industry stereotype and to outline security career and program strategies that you can implement today. Joining me today is my friend and leadership mentor, Patrick Ayertey, business security lead at Twilio. When it comes to management and leadership, Patrick actually executes the role in the way we all know it should be done, but seldom see. Patrick leads with quiet confidence, and he's a calm, steady force that inspires rather than demands. With humanity at the core of his leadership philosophy, he doesn't lead from the front or from the back, but from within the team. And he demonstrates profound understanding that true power lies in empathy and kindness, and not control. Patrick is a reminder that leaders don't need to be the most imposing figure in a room to make significant impact. I hope you're all excited for an enlightening conversation that challenges leaders to focus on their people rather than outcomes, especially when the success of the former always results in the success of the latter. Let's get into it. Welcome to the GRC Podcast. I'm really excited to have you on today.
Thank you, Mark, for the opportunity for bringing me on here. And I believe I'm your third.
Yep, number 3. Making sure I'm getting all the people that I really enjoy working with, that they're in the top 3.
Awesome. Absolutely. I'm excited to be here and I'm looking forward to this conversation. I know you got a lot of questions, so I'm excited to see what we get into and what we can share to the world.
Yeah, and today's topic, I think you're a perfect guest for. We're going to talk about management. And I think, yes, this is not a uniquely GRC topic, but I think if you're working in GRC, just as somebody in the workforce in general, it's good to understand the dynamics of IC versus manager and what happens at the top and what dictates your career. And as a GRC professional, you're going to be relying on a lot of different teams and mostly the management of those teams to get the work that's important to you completed. So I think it's going to be a valuable topic. And you specifically, you went from IC to manager, and now you're operating as a very highly influential IC at the company. So being able to discuss the differences between those two roles, the pluses, the minuses, different insights that you might have gleaned from each and how you're using that in all the different roles. I think starting out, when it comes to management, I think people always drop the people part of it. At the end of the day, your role is a people manager, and everybody is different. And I think when it comes to management styles, like my style is different from your style, which is different from Steve's style, which is different from Dustin's style. Like, I really appreciate little aspects of everything that you guys do. I'm not going to be exactly any of you. I will have my own style, but at the end of the day, we do have our own style. So I wanted to pose the first question to you. How do you view management?
Yeah, before I go into that, I'll kind of preface with what you just said, right? We're all unique and we all have different personalities, and that plays into how we manage people, right? But there's specific things that you got to think about when it comes to management. You got to have your own philosophy. You got to define that because that's who you are. That's your brand. And that's the kind of brand you want to create for your team that you manage, right? So that is a key thing that I think when it comes to management. I think more of leadership, but we're going to use those terms interchangeably on this podcast. So when it comes to that, it's all about the philosophy, right? And that's what my journey has been. Like, there were things that I was looking at when I was an IC, and I felt, okay, when I was an IC, I always used to ask myself, like, what kind of manager do I want to be? Like, and I've been through the opportunity of working with different managers, and I've picked up a lot of good skills and good practices and good philosophies from a bunch of folks. And there are some not so great people I've worked with also, but it's in every situation, you can always pick something from that, right? So that has been something that's always been in the back of my mind, transitioning from an IC to a manager, and to what you said, being a highly influential IC in my current role. It's all about philosophy and being able to work with a group of people who can buy into that philosophy. And that's one of the biggest things to do as a manager. So that's how I see it. The philosophy defines who you are. And if you're able to get people to buy into that philosophy, then 50% of the work is done. The rest is going to be execution. And this is just working with the people to get to that shared vision or goal.
Now, when it comes to the philosophy, how much of that is like organic and how much of that is pulled from experiences you've had with great managers? Because I think one of the things that I've struggled with coming into a management position is I love a lot of the managers that I've worked with, and I'm not them. I think I alluded to this earlier at the beginning. The intro is I am not going to be the exact same person as the managers that I have had but at the same time, I feel like I can bring my own character to it. How much influence do your past managers have on the development of your own philosophy, and how much of it do you feel like is unique?
I think I'll use the word unique because I think I've just through life, I've always emerged as a leader in a lot of situations. So I just felt like I had natural abilities to lead a group of people. And so just translating that natural ability into people management really helped me in defining my philosophies. But yeah, in those journeys, there are a lot of things I did as mistakes. I use them as opportunities for me to improve, right? So there were a lot of things that were more innate to me just by my nature and just I'm a type A personality and I have opinions, but I also work on a lot of opinions. I like to work with people. And part of that is also my upbringing, how I was brought up. I'm from Ghana. So it's just like my life experiences and situations that I've been in life had to make me be a leader in those situations. So those are some of the things that are natural. Now, bringing it back to working with different managers and how they've influenced me, I had all those things that I thought would be a great manager. But once you start working with people who've been through the experience and they've been further along the journey in the management career, you can see a lot of things that you thought was the best was actually not the best. So my experience with other managers just helped me validate some of the philosophies I had and also made me rethink my approach in how I'll work with my direct report or any group of people I work with. And finally, in addition to that, what has actually helped me also is the fact that I'm a music director for my church. And then so I always tell people like if you can work with a group of musicians to have a good concert, a good show, or a good performance, you're great at managing people. I use that. Okay, managing project. I'll use the word project and people in the sense that I'm a director, so it's a continuous thing. So I'm not just like working on a big show for a month, and that's more of a project than being managing the project. But I work with people who we go to rehearse every Saturday, we sing at church every Sunday, and so you're managing those guys, and those guys you don't even pay them. So just think about you managing people you don't pay them, so you don't really have a strong, authority on them, but being able to get them to buy into a shared vision and for them to do it voluntarily and still being able to manage your egos, I feel like it really puts you in a good learning process to be a great manager. And the magicians mostly are like we're egocentric sometimes. You just want to show up a little bit, right? But you got to being able to establish the right environment and culture to know that the goal is for us to be in harmony and not to be too louder than the other person and be at the same wavelength and know that you're going to have your times to have a solo, right? Within the music there, you can hear there are times where someone does a little thing different from what everyone is doing, right? So those are some of the things that's helped shape me, my philosophy. And so I'm able to translate that into managing people.
Now, I had a couple of different points in there that you brought up. So I think one, it sounds like one of your messages to managers is it's totally okay to be yourself. Like you don't have to completely emulate somebody that you look up to. It's totally fine to have your own interpretation of it, your own presentation. You can use the experiences to color your own presentation of what it is to be a manager and be a leader, but at the same time, it's totally fine to put your own spin on it. And then number two, I was recently thinking about what it means to be a manager in terms of having power versus having influence. And I think some of what you're getting at is bringing up you don't pay these people. There's almost like you're the director, but at the same time, there's no real reason outside of you treat them well and you have their best interest in mind, which is why they would listen to you. And I think, do you think there's a difference or a cultural, how am I going to put this? It's like not a like coming after people hard,
Yeah.
but do you think some managers conflate having power over having actual influence over their employees?
Yeah, I believe I've worked with some people who've had that conflict, right? Looking at power versus influence. And a lot of these are also culturally driven, right? There's specific cultures where I'll use Ghana, for example, right? So we have like respect, like for our leaders and elders, right? To like the utmost level, right? So in Ghana, when you see a manager coming into the office, one of the ways to show them respect is you go grab their bag and help them take the bag to the office, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. People will be like, hey, those things could be perceived differently in different culture settings. And when those things could be seen like more like someone has power over you, right? And so that those could be interpreted differently. But now coming back to conflict between power and influence. I think a lot of people do that. And it's the fact that you're not really considering the human aspect of what you're doing. Because at the end of the day, when you're working as a manager, a people manager, you're working with human beings. You're not working with machines. Okay. So with people, you got to find a way to influence them. And I always use the word everybody's a leader in their own way. Because people can come, you can have someone working for you as even an entry level, but they're a leader in their house. Someone is a husband somewhere, or someone is a leader of a soccer group, right? So people are leaders in their own way, right? But in the setting, in the professional setting, they're reporting to you. So being able to influence those people who are leaders in their own way, who have their own set philosophy, the influence part is very, very key. Because then if you're able to get them to buy into your philosophy because they're looking up to you and they already have their own set of expectation they have in your mind as leaders in their own way. But if you're able to help them align that expectation philosophy they have to what you have as a shared vision and shared goal for the team, it makes it easier for them to follow you along and for you to lead them to get to the desired state. So it's a very important thing to think about the human aspect of it and not think about people as like pawns to as a means to an ends, right? And there's the different school of thought that says, hey, you're being paid, you're professional, get the job done, which is fine because we're all professionals, we're all paid to get the job done. And something you expect people to know that, but people don't get it because I always use the word like common sense is not common to common people, or the obvious thing is not obvious to the obvious people in life sometimes. So you're thinking, hey, you're getting paid good money, you're not doing what you're expected to do. And with that, like as a good manager, that's where the emotional intelligence comes in. That's where the empathy comes in, right? Because there could be several mitigating circumstances or factors around that has influenced the ability to do a work or being in the right state of mind to comprehend what you're trying to do or have them follow what you're trying to do, right? So that's where you get into the human level and get to know them and talk to them, meet them on that level, right? And then if you're able to figure out what is causing the gap between what you're expecting them to do versus what is actually happening, then you can have some level of influence over them and not show your power. When you go in and you begin to show power, you're gonna just naturally people get on a defensive mode, right? And as we begin to see a lot of frictions within teams and team dynamic because like person is coming in and trying to show they're powerful and trying to show their ego. And as I said, everybody's a leader in their own way. And so people will naturally respond defensively to someone who comes to show power over someone who comes to understand as human beings and work with them at a human level, but still get the job done.
I'm really glad you brought up the culture and the shared vision because as you were speaking, I was thinking about past opportunities that I've had where like you get paid a really high salary and you might be able to accomplish work. Again, you're getting your salary, you're paid to do a job. Chances are
Mhm.
within that year, you're going to be executing something. There will be some outputs of your work, but at the same time, the efficiency and the satisfaction that I had as an IC working with somebody where our cultures, our visions, it was all shared. It was a much better experience. So I think that's also one thing I would implore ICs to do, especially if you're looking for a new opportunity. When you do have that opportunity to speak to the manager, asking the cultural questions is really important. Obviously, you can take a look at a company, you can look at their benefits package, you can look at what the role says on the job description, but at the end of the day, culture does play a very key role in terms of the efficiency and the happiness of employees. And I think that's really something for everybody to keep in mind, especially managers. I think one of the things you mentioned too that I found curious was since like you're not from the United States, originally you're from Ghana. When you talked about coming into like corporate America, what are some things that you think you maybe brought to the table that you recognize that, I don't know, maybe native United States employees, just the perspectives were a little bit different that you were able to bring to the table to better the business?
Yeah, I think some of the few things I noticed, which were when we come in from like a foreign country to like America, we do go through like culture shock, right? So things that are like aha moments for us, just based on our backgrounds and our experiences. So I didn't notice, and this is not like generally, but I'm just saying in the place I've worked at, people like to just cut to the chase, just get the job done. And that was some of the things I had to experience. But I do believe that human beings are not machines. So you can't just get the job done and not considering like all the circumstances around them, their life, their mental state. And so those are some of the things that I did see. It's like almost like very aggressive and almost vicious in some sense, because people are always very ambitious. They want to get promoted. So I work in an environment where people are almost like taking advantage of people to get promoted, where someone almost like steals your work to get promoted. So those are some of the things I saw when I was in IC. And I was like, huh, like this is not how I envisioned things to be. So those are some of the things that I saw. And so for me, coming from a culture from Ghana, right? I'm from Ghana, where there's a lot of more collectivism, right? Whereas very group centered or group centric, you always think about what do you do for the greater good of the group. And so there are some of the things that I said, okay, maybe I'm not going to change the culture, but I can be that bright light in that corner I'm at, right? So wherever I'm at, or whichever company I'm at, or whichever opportunity I'm given, I can just be that bright light in that corner that will get the job done, but also cares about the people whom you're working with. Because at the end of the day, when people are in a good mental state and they're happy, it really usually translates into being productive at work.
Kind of on that note, because especially taking over a team and not having any kind of management experience, I think one of the things that I picked up from you is like the starting point for your management journey, if you just bring humanity to it and recognize that you're managing people, not machines that are going to crank out a task for you, would you recommend that a lot of leaders approach things from that perspective instead of getting bogged down in all the different technical stuff, again, like the trainings, the HR stuff? If you approach people as people, do you think that a lot of the problems can be resolved, or a lot of the benefits can be quickly realized if that's just your starting approach?
Yeah, absolutely. You got to approach people as people, because when you think about it, why are we all working? We're all working for a reason, right? We're working for ourselves, we're working for our family. So there's a huge human element in there, right? It's very obvious. We work to get money, we work to get paid, we work to get promoted. We also working for the company to be better. So if the company is better, we also become better, right? But we're human beings. We're driven by emotions. We have personal lives that could impact or that could bleed into our working environment, right? So when you start managing people, one of the first thing that you got to do is you got to know your team. Like you got to know the people you have on your team. You got to even know their personalities, what they like, what they don't like, some of the things. And those are some examples like when I was managing a team, like for example, when I went to Salesforce, right? And I was managing a team. So it took about 6 months for them to get that replacement. So when I went in there, the mood of the team was like really bad. Like the morale was very bad. So it took me a while to get in there, right? But one of the first thing I did was I had to know everybody at a very personal level if they allowed me. Some people were very open to that at a very quicker pace. Some people took time, but I was very patient enough. So one of the elements in managing people, you have to be patient also, because with people, because like we all brought up differently, we all have different temperament, different personalities, right? So you got to acknowledge like the different personalities that you have in your team and work with them as human beings and not as machine, not as resources that you need to control and optimize to achieve a task. That's where I draw the distinction between being a leader and a manager, right? Because management is seeing resources. Leadership is seeing people that needs to be inspired to get to a desired outcome, or to that need to be inspired to achieve a shared vision or a shared vision for a group or a team, right? So those are some of the things that when you're leading people, you got to figure it out, like the people. And I think I mentioned to you, so even with my one-on-ones, I had different ways of having my one-on-ones. There were some folks that just like to go on walks. So we just go on a walk. And through our walks, we just have a one-on-ones. I used to take some folks to the arcade room to just play a game. And while we're playing the game, they beat me or I beat them. Most of the time they beat me. He was really good. And we'll still just go through and talk through the things we have to talk through. But it became very personal, where it almost felt like I owe them, they owe me, that kind of relationship. And so it really helped me like working with the people I had, and they could tell, like I could tell how extra mile they went for me when I asked them to do something for me, and I also went the extra mile to do something for them, right? So I had to foster the relationship. But it's very, very key that you work with people and not work with resources when you're in management of a leader of a team.
That's the this is kind of my taboo question. So when it comes to promotions and raises, I think there's some things as a manager you see kind of the back end that you're not fully aware of when you're actually an IC. Is there anything that you think that IC should be aware of that might not be shared, like throughout the broader organization, that people managers might be aware of, such as like budgets, constraints,
Mhm.
percentages, how people get the percentages they're given, and then the consequences of, especially if there is a budget, where does that budget come from? Is there anything that you think IC should be mindful of or just aware of, that this is how business operates? It's not good, it's not bad. I'm not saying any of that. This is just a reality of people have budgets. This is how the process works. This is something to be mindful of as you're going through your year and kind of planning what level of effort you're going to give versus the potential ROIs.
I think there's got to be some level of transparency around the process, because one of the things I did for my team, and I'll give that example and then move into answering the question, right? I made sure they understood how the promotion process was, right? And those are some of the things that my previous team because I manage people there, Salesforce, what goes into that. The criteria, what is going to go into you getting that raise or that extra like merit increase or that bonus, right? So those are all communicated there, right? So you can't tell people about other people's pay range, but I think there were some
Yeah.
principles that we had in there where your comp ratio has to be within a certain spot, right? So at Salesforce, we're looking at, maybe it's different now, but you have to be around the 90% like comp ratio, right?
Because yeah,
It,
comp ratio was something I wasn't even aware of until like I took
yeah,
this one. Like, oh, that would have been nice to know.
yeah. So that's something. So when you become a people manager, you get all that data, right? In a system like, for example, Workday, the other companies out there, right? So you see what the comp ratio is. So you, and that's something that I think it's okay to discuss that with the team. I don't think that's something you need to hide from them because they need to know what your comp ratio is. And then you can kind of work towards improving it, right? To maybe 90% or something closer to a one, right? So I feel like that information needs to be shared, but you also need to share it with them, letting them know that for them to get to that next level, they need to work for that. So it's not like a given. Like people cannot feel entitled
Mhm.
to having pay increases, right? People have to be rewarded based on what they do and what they deserve that they've earned. They need to get it, right? So one of the things that we did was our performance, the raises were tied to your performance rating. In the past, things were not done like everybody gets like a flat 4%, whatever percentage was that, right? But now things were, if you have a particular performance rating, you can get up to like an 8%, or I'm just using as an example, right? Or 5%. If you fall below a certain percentage, you can get like 3 or 2, or even not any percentage increase. So those
Mhm.
things needs to be communicated to the team. So they're not sitting there and expecting to get a raise and not doing the role, like doing the work properly. So far as you know how your performance is evaluated, what the performance rating is, and how that ties into percentage increases in your pay, then you're in a good spot. But I've been in situations where I took over a team, right, where there was someone who was like working really well, like who needs to be recognized, but they came in at a very low pay scale. And maybe it was because of how they negotiated, or maybe the recruiter didn't like provide them like that right guidance into like negotiating. So they were really, really underpaid. And I had to like adjust their pay. And then what did I do? Like, so luckily for me, there were some folks who just joined, and I felt like they were too new to rate. So they didn't really require to get like that 4% increase. So I was able to kind of
Yeah.
work with them. I would say, okay, so I took part of their money, right? That 4%, which was given to me in a pool, and I moved it towards this person that I felt like was underpaid. And I brought them up to par with some of the people at this level. And so then I had to explain to people, I was like, hey, I didn't tell them what the numbers were. I was like, hey, usually you get this percentage, but you're new. And there's some folks here who've been doing the work very, very well. And I don't feel like they're rewarded better. So I kind of move some of the money to make sure they're rewarded equally as everybody in the team. And it was all based on the culture I created of trust. So then when I explain it to them that way, no one is like, oh man, like, why is he getting more money than I did? Right. You have to create that environment where people feel like at the end of the day, people need to be rewarded for what they do and what they deserve to be rewarded for. Right. And so I was able to adjust that pay for that person to the extent that after during the next pay review, everybody got what they earned. But I had to explain it to people. And I was lucky in a sense where I had people who were just joined the company. I don't feel like I needed to prorate their raise. I didn't have to give them the full 4%. I was able to move some of that money to increase that person. So as a manager, you got to make sure you understand that. And I explained it even to the person, and I even give that person extra level of trust towards me. Like I was like, oh man, like this guy came and like did this for me. Like, I didn't deserve it. Like, he kind of put things that way, right? But I felt like you deserved it because you've earned it. And I felt like you had to be rewarded at the right pay scale because your comp ratio was very, very low and I had to bring it all the way up. So those are some of the things you got to be transparent with a team. You don't have to give a lot of details, but you have to explain the sausage making process to them. So they're not like found wanting and figuring out and getting confused. And what's going to happen is you'll start looking around the industry, how much people making, and then you start flirting with other companies, right? And then you're trying to get out and get more money. So yeah.
Because that's one of those things that I wish I knew, because I feel like when you're an IC, you have certain expectations. You're like, I'm working 120%, so therefore I deserve a 20% increase based on the value that I've created for the company, while not having an understanding of that's not how it works. Like, there is a budget. This is usually set like per fiscal year.
Hmm.
It's not necessarily tied to your performance, the value that you generate for the business. There are things that, like you mentioned before, like moving some of the percentages around from a pool to one person who's working exceptionally versus other people who like might be new or might not have the particular rating that warrants a really high percentage increase. But I wish I knew that, because I think there was a manager that I had at a past company, phenomenal guy, and I think he really went to bat for me. And I think part of the reason why I left was because I didn't have an understanding of what was happening in the back end. So there might have been like, this was the absolute top of what he could get for me, and he really like went to bat and did the absolute best he could. But I was still disappointed because I didn't have that knowledge of this is how the process works. So I think that's something that hopefully could keep some disappointment at bay if your team recognizes this is what I'm doing for you. Yes, you might be disappointed with the outcome, but just know that these are the variables I was dealing with, and you
Hmm.
can judge my level of care for you based on like these kind of objective facts about the process.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And so, yeah, to my point, it's you as a manager, you got to be transparent with your team, and you have to make it a point to do something about it too, right? I've seen some managers who would just BS it, right, and they'll come up with something, and you know what they're saying is BS, right? They're not going to do anything about it, but they'll come up with some lies, right? So you got to be
Mm-hmm.
transparent and have the person trust you to know you want a wall for them, and it's just where the other mitigating circumstances around like the company, the budget, the macroeconomy, which will not allow you to kind of move it for them that way, right? So you got to communicate better and be honest.
Yeah, and just the realization it is a business. There is math that's involved to this. Like, everybody can't,
Absolutely.
like, because it's one of the things where it's like companies love to talk about we hire the best, and it's like, all right, if you're going to hire the best, chances are these are going to be some high performers. And if everybody's a high performer, like, can everybody get promoted? Like, that's not sustainable. Can everybody get like 20% increases? Like, that's not sustainable. So like, making sure that your ICs are aware that companies have thresholds, like, even for example, like only 10% of the workforce population can get promoted. Like,
Hmm.
knowing that, knowing the other people who may have been at certain roles longer than you, that might be kind of closer to that potential promotion period. Like, it's just these little variables of kind of understanding how the business operates as an IC, I think would put a lot of disappointment or assumptions that maybe people aren't working in their best interests kind of aside.
Yeah, and great point. And what really helps the team is like explain it to them, like tell them like there's a curve, like you can't. There's always going to be that 5% that gets promoted or 5% that are like the super high performing people, right? Based on how your company does it, right? But there's always going to be a distribution curve, and you're going to have most people around the mean, and you have people on the extreme, either on the lower percentile or the higher percentile, right? So you got to explain to them And so when you explain to them and you're sitting down with them and you're coming up with your objectives for the year, they know what they're working towards. They know if they want to get to that high percentile. So people, because there's some people who just like cruise control at work, right? So people who are hungry for success, they're gonna know, okay, this is how I'm gonna get that promotion. This is how I'm gonna get that raise if I work harder. So you need to explain to them, and that's gonna something you're gonna create as part of the culture. So when you have that in their mindset, it is an extra level of motivation for them to say, hey, I want to get a raise, so I'm gonna work harder and just do my best to get there. Right. If you don't set the objectives, then people are not going to deliver because part of what I'm saying is like you trust the team, right? But you also want to give them like like a little spark, like a fire that will keep them ignited, right? And so that is also the extra motivation. So you have all the team success and all the culture, the fun stuff you do, right? By the end of the day, you want to make money. You want to take care of your family. If you want to make more money,
Yep.
this is how you make more money. You got to show them that way. And so that's an extra motivation for them. For the folks who care, will work harder. Folks who don't care, they'll just cruise control.
Yeah, and you can kind of let me know if you agree or disagree with this. Like one of the things that, like, again, it took me becoming a manager to articulate. This is kind of the way that I operate. Is like once you're made aware of this is how the business functions. Here are my potential like chances of getting that promotion. Also keeping in mind that there is a social aspect to it. Like regardless of how much we like to talk about metrics and mathematics and all that fun stuff, like there is a very real social aspect to the promotion process. I basically let my team know like you should continue working at the highest potential ability that you have. You should want to learn for the sake of learning. You should want to do a good job for the sake of growing your professional skills. But at the same time, like you could work towards a promotion, but don't let that be the discouraging factor whether or not you want to be a high performer.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. That should be the only thing because then you're gonna get in the habit of like success by any means necessary, right? And you don't want to create an environment like that too. That could be very bad for the team.
Yeah, but that's going back to I think we had the conversation about visibility, and I just want to make sure that ICs are aware that that plays into the social aspect of promotions. Like the person who does the work that's seen by more people is more likely to get that buy into the promotion than I mean, you might be crushing it, but people might not see the impacts of your work, and that does play into the performance review cycle.
Absolutely, yeah. You have to do your part, making it visible, and you also have to like have a manager who recognizes that, who's also going to help you to do that. And those are all the good things that go into having a good manager, a good people manager, someone who recognizes that the ability or the opportunity to give someone that visibility and to highlight your work they're doing, and also go to war for them during promotion. And one of the things I used to tell my team is like the real work or your real like ability to get promoted happens behind closed door. So you got to create that brand. You got to make sure your work is seen. You got to be vocal, like not like in a very, very nonsensical way, but like be vocal in a very sensible way. Say the right things, ask the right questions. Don't be mutants and be quiet. Don't be in chat and not contribute. Like you have to like be seen and be known for something. You can be like a ghostwriter. Ghostwriters are not gonna get promoted. Like people have to like know like, hey, you're doing this. And then because a lot of times when you go to pitch for promotion, like there are people who you're gonna go and have all this presentation, and other managers will be like, "Hey, I don't know this person. I didn't know they did this work." It makes it harder for you as a manager to pitch for their promotion. So you have to like make sure you're known cross functionally and outside the team. So when you're pitching for promotion, all that you said is being validated by people. People are like, yeah, yeah, that's true, and that's your brand. And your brand will speak for you behind closed doors.
Yeah, so just ICs be aware of the nuances and again, this is all just kind of setting expectations because again, as I mentioned earlier, how I had that one manager like who was fantastic. I just want to make sure people are aware that this is the process. and that there's maybe no malice behind certain outcomes, and maybe it was literally the best they could do. But I think, yeah, having that open conversation, because yeah, at the end of the day, this is people's livelihoods. It is a very emotional topic. It's something that means a lot. We're all not going to work just for pats on the back. I got electric bills
Absolutely.
where they don't take thank yous for the hard work. So I want that money. But just making sure that people are aware that this is the process.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Now, is there anything else that you think ICs should be aware of that you think might have tripped you up in your career, or just as a manager you've learned and you're like, man, I really wish that this had been told to me on a, I guess, a more open in a more open way?
One thing is it's an emotional topic. It's negotiating for salary. That's something I was very bad at when I came to the United States, because when you come in to the United States and you're an IC, you just take whatever you're given. Because like in my mind, I was like, oh, I do the dollar conversion to my country's rate. It's a lot of money, but it's not a lot of money in the US because you have to pay bills, right? So I
I
made a
say,
lot of
especially
mistakes.
if you're working here, like you're not in
Especially,
Ghana, so
I'm
like
not
you
in Ghana
deserve the
anymore,
U.S.
right?
salary.
So those are some of the things I had to learn the hard way. Like you have to negotiate better. Like you need to know like what the industry is paying, and learn how to negotiate and be okay to push back. Because I've been in situations where I felt like, what if I push back? They're gonna like rescind their offer and give it to someone else. In my mind, when I became a manager, I was like, when we get to the point of making an offer, we've already made up our mind on you, right? So we're gonna do our best to bring you in here. But I didn't have that knowledge because I wasn't managing people. So as an IC, I felt like, man, if I should like re, you know counter offer, they're like, okay, forget him, and like they're not gonna hire him anymore. So those were my fears. So I took whatever was given to me, and then I started the company. I was like, man, I'm actually being lowballed, right? And that's not a good feeling to have when you feel like you're being lowballed, right? So those are some of the things I would say to IC, like when you're getting into a new role, especially like it's harder when you're in a company because of like their policies and giving raises and stuff. But when you go into a new company, make sure you negotiate better and not just be reasonable. Also, if the first initial offer is like very reasonable, it doesn't mean you should like push back on it, but you should be able to figure out like, okay, is this what it is in the industry, and be able to say, I want more if needed, and not just
Yeah.
accept it, because you're gonna start a company and then you're gonna regret it and start getting salty.
So that's getting hiring. I feel like getting hiring, it's easier to have that discussion because companies usually set this is the market value, and there's less negotiation in that. Now, once you get hired to a company, when it comes to some of those salary discussions, so we did discuss the limitations and some of those different kind of thresholds, or the math that's in place that maybe will limit your top potential outcome. But how would you suggest that ICs approach their managers for those salary discussions? And for managers, because I feel like money is always, it's an uncomfortable thing, and whether you're an IC asking about it, you feel uncomfortable. Sometimes managers feel uncomfortable talking about it. Again, it goes back to maybe a little bit of the ego, like if they're getting more money, I better be getting more money, and
Hmm.
how do I have this conversation? And money makes everybody feel uncomfortable, and there's potential for it to things to get lost in translation. How would you expect both parties to kind of come to the table to discuss that?
I think you got to be honest, right? You got to see every company has like the pay range. So you have the low, the midpoint, and the high, right? So I feel like that's something you got to be aware of. Like that's my opinion. And then that'll help you determine your comp ratio. Um, and so that comp ratio, I think the IC should know what their comp ratio is, the manager should know what their comp ratio is, and so they can help them get there. Now, if the range, if what you have in your mind, it's outside that range, then there's nothing you can do about it. Let's say, like, I'll use an example, right? Let's say the low is 100K, the mid is like 115, and the high is like 130, right? That's an example. If you come in expecting to get 140, like you're out of that range at that level you're in, at like the level you're in, right? So for you to get to that next level of pay increasing, you have to get promoted, right? So like those things needs to be had, and so you're not there getting mad over something that is not practical for that level you're at. So in order for you to have this conversation, is either you evaluate your comp ratio and then make sure your performance rating matches that. Because if your manager, I'm not sure how it works at Twilio because I don't have access to that. But Salesforce, we used to promote every quarter. And every quarter, there are two options. You can ask for increase in pay or promotion, right? And so if I feel like someone is below a specific comp ratio, within that quarter, without promoting them, I can ask for an increase. But I need to have a strong business case to ask for that increase, i.e., they're not being paid well, their comp ratio is very low, and they're very high performing person, and their pay is not commensurate with the folks who are getting more than him and they're working less. So you need to have those processes in place and being able to go about things that way. If that doesn't exist, or if like what your person's trying to get more, it's outside of that range, then it's like your hands are held, like your hands are tied behind your back. So you just got to understand the dynamics, and you have to be transparent with the person. Like, this is a comp ratio. At this point, this is where you are. I cannot just, it's not like a switch you can flip and just get someone out there. Like, there's internal processes, and you have to wait for that review cycle, or that promotion cycle. And I'm sure probably that's how it happens here. I don't think you can just promote someone in a quarter unless there's a special case for that, right? So you have to understand the internal process around the comp review cycle and the promotion cycle, and the person has to be willing to wait for that review cycle for you to be able to push them up. And those are things you got to be transparent about the person to the person. I mean, you cannot just hide it from the person. If not, then they'll start getting very grumpy feelings about things and not be happy in the company.
Let's see, I feel like half of management's job is to be clear, set the expectation, instead of like using like obfuscating the information and thinking somehow like people not being informed is going to make people happier if they don't know what they don't know, as opposed to being upfront and honest about it. So I'd really like to see a shift in the industry and that dynamic between managers and ICs to just be more open and honest about the process.
Yeah, and then it's okay to be open because people feel like, oh, if I give them more information, they're gonna use that as a leverage to negotiate or go get a job and try and get a raise, right? It's okay to be open about certain things. You don't have to share all the information, but I think you need to give them the level of that view of the data that they need to have access to, which is necessary for them to do their job right. So don't hide it from them. Definitely, you cannot shut up people's pay with them, but you can talk about their pay, their comp ratio, and then you just have to look at them currently. Are you working at that level that is needed for you to ask for that pay raise? If not, then let's work towards that, because that's the case you're going to make
And
for them.
if
Because when you go and make that case, you have to provide a evidence justification in like Workday. And if you don't have anything to stand on, then it's going to be a lost cause for you.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to the short term versus long term, because a lot of the times it probably isn't going to be about the money. Like if I can trust you as a manager, that's worth more to me than potentially getting like 20,000 extra dollars and working for somebody who is going to just undermine me, make my life miserable. So I think the trust to me, and I think to a lot of people, if they really thought critically about it, is a lot more important than the potential dollar value. So just again, getting that out there, setting the expectation, making sure people are aware that it's just an open and honest relationship, and they'll probably find that more valuable than whatever potential disappointments they have based on company limitations.
Yeah, and then the thing is also, it's not just one way of compensation, right? You have equity, you have bonuses and stuff, right? So you can get creative ways. Like, let's say you think someone deserves it, right? Salesforce, we had like spot bonuses. I don't think we have it here, right? So you can offer someone spot bonus when they do things like very well, when they do things very well, and they really deserve it. So those are all ways of compensating people, even if their base pay is not where they want to get to. You can find creative ways of making people happier, and knowing that you're recognizing their work and they're getting rewarded for the work they're doing.
Yeah. Now we've done a lot of focus on the people and personal aspect of people management, especially when it comes to IC versus manager relations, and that's within your own team. When it comes to working with other teams, as a manager, what seems to have worked best with you, either for people to influence you and your team to complete work on their behalf that might not necessarily be 100% tied to your own success, and it's definitely going to be impacting another team much more? Or what are some tips that you've used to influence other teams to complete work on your behalf that really resonates with those leaders?
It's number one is the human aspect of things. I work with one. You know, I really respect her. She goes by Monday. She's still at Salesforce. She tells me like you have a superpower, and I was like, "What's that superpower?" It's like you have an ability to bring people together and just get them to do things, even people at a very high level. Um, and I'll use like an example of something I did, right? So at Salesforce, I was part of the team that started like the insider threat, like not started, but make it more operationalized, right? And so I had to like create like the policy and the standards from scratch, right? And in order to do that, um, I had to work cross functionally with the HR people, with the folks from privacy, folks from legal, folks from security, the BU, right? So you had all those people. And when you create policy is a very high level document. So it has to be by the R process. It had to be approved by like the VP plus. So I was a director there, and then I had to work with all those VPs. So the question is, how do I influence those VPs to get to that desired state? And that was the task I had. That was something I had to do. And so how did I work with that? First of all, I had to like meet with everybody outside work. So that's one of my strategies. So before I even started a project, I like to meet with the person to introduce myself to them, right? Get to know them. They get to know me. They see where I'm coming from. I see where they're coming from. We align our thoughts and ideas. And then in those conversations, you're gonna see like you're gonna have intersection point for everything you're doing because you're all supporting the company. So I like to establish those relationships from the get go. Um, and then so once this relationship are established, it's easier for you to start working with them, right? So those are some of the approaches. So I met with all the VPs, the SVPs for like the human resource and business partnership and everybody, right? So that's why I go back again is a human aspect. So you have to meet people and get to know them first. And you got to establish a rapport or a relationship with them. Once you have a relationship with people, like it's half of the battle is already conquered. The next is gonna be just more working around schedules and like just more like wordsmithing and all this stuff, right? So I was able to meet with everybody outside the project I had to do in creating those policies. So that was one of the ways. So first of all, my thing is first of all, you got to establish a relationship and a rapport with the folks you're working with, and you got to show them that you care about what you're doing and that what you're about to do influences what you're doing in a very positive way. So you have to share the vision of what you're doing. And the way I had to do it was that insider threat is like a key thing for the company, whether you're in HR, whether you're in legal, because even when it's like an insider threat and if something happens, you got to bring the legal team inside. You got to bring the HR person if someone got to get fired or something, or someone needs to go through some training or some kind of reprimand, right? So everybody in there kind of saw the need for that, right? So I had to find a way to sell the program to them and why we need it at the current state we're in. And so I was like, okay, I'm gonna need your help. And so one of the ways to kind of get people to kind of do things is you got to let them feel like they're needed for what you're doing. And it's a human thing. Like people feel compelled to doing things when they feel like, oh, I'm valued with what I have to do. I'm valid in this to provide this input. It's a psychological thing. So you're able to get people to feel valued to the process and feel like the input is going to be recognized in the process. It makes it easier for you to work with them. So number one, the relationship with the people. Number two, you got to create that value and show them that you value their opinion and you care about what they're going to contribute to the table. And then number three, you got to show your willingness to work with them at that level, right? And number four, just like constant communication with them, right? And then sometimes even okay to over communicate with them. And so those are some of the things that I've done in the past. So the human aspect of it, just relationship building, relationship establishment. Number two, just showing that you value the opinion. Number three, doing something about that to show that practice you're practicing or you're putting the things that you've shown them from a value standpoint into practice, i.e., going to them, talking to them, and say, "Hey, this is what I've done. How do you want to contribute to it? Like, what do you want to add to it?" Right? It helps. And number four, just communicating. And the piece about all this is you always got to go with something like a solution. So at that level, at the level I'm at right now, it's different at different levels. you don't want to go and tell them about the problem. You want to go and tell them about the solution you have in mind, and then let them feel like they're part of the solution and solicit their input from there. And so those are some of the things that I've been able to do. Um, you know, I'm probably not articulating it well, but I think I'm able to do it better in practice, which is why she told me I had those superpowers, right? But those are some of the things that's helped me to work cross functionally. It's the relationship is very key in everything in life you do.
I think you articulated that just fine because as you were rattling that off, I was thinking of my own individual things. It is so easy to blow somebody off if all you're seeing is a Slack message tied to somebody with it's just the generic person icon as opposed to a face, especially if you've never had a conversation with them. The second you get somebody on a Zoom call and you have that face to face or you meet with them in person, you immediately want to do more things for them because you know them on a more human level. The second one I think is making sure you're again articulating it in terms that they find valuable and also that they have feedback in. I'm not sure if this is the same for you, but especially if I wasn't consulted in something and something is being put in my plate that says, you need to do this because it benefits me, but I've, again, had no input into what the work that I am doing is and what the strategy behind the actual project is. I wrong, right or wrong, it's easier to blow that off and to make sure it's what's like that's not my priority. That might be your priority, but I was never consulted on it. I don't really buy out. I'm not really bought into the strategy that you're trying to put forward, and I've got my own work on my plate that's just affects me. It's just something that is directly tied to my own performance, and that's what I'm going to focus on because you haven't demonstrated to me that this is going to impact me positively in any way, shape, or form. So I think those are
Yeah,
all really important call outs.
absolutely. And the security professionals, like, as you and I, like, our work is cross functionally dependent, right? So you've got to establish those relationships. Like, as a GRC person, you're gonna work with everybody, like everybody in the security team, in the engineering team, in HR, legal, privacy, right? You get to work with everybody. So you don't want to go to the person when you only need them. Like, you have to establish that relationship from the get go, right? Where they feel like, okay, there's someone they can rely on. There's someone they can always come to you when they have a question, right? And those are some of the things I do when I join in a new company. Like coming to Twilio, like I had to like meet with everybody I knew that I was going to interface with. And my boss was, was great enough to come with like the 30, 60-day plan and had suggested some names in there. But in addition to that, when I was in meetings and I hear people talk and I see their title, I was going to look them up on Slack on Workday, right? And I see what they do. I'll schedule a meeting with them, right? And establish this relationship. And I'll ask them something you don't want to impose yourself. You ask them, is it okay for me and you to just meet maybe bi-weekly or monthly every quarter, just to kind of keep a relationship going? And 99% of the time is yes, right? And then once you have the opportunity, you create those cadences and a meeting with them, right? And then you establish a relationship. So when it comes to getting job done at a very quicker pace, it's quicker because I got that policy thing done within a month. And so she said, I've never seen anybody do something like this in a month time, like because of how
I mean,
complex it
now
was.
having policy under me, I can absolutely agree with who that is quick.
Yeah, that was quick, but that was because of how I went about things. And so it's all there are specific principles that you can get out of this. That I'm saying.
I think you did a great job articulating those 3 points. Is there anything else that you really think needs to be highlighted as this is a critical thing for GRC professionals to do if they want to get work accomplished and they have to work with different managers?
I think the main thing as a GRC professional is again, I'll just for the folks that are listening for the first time, GRC is like governance, risk, and compliance, right? So for
Thank you for defining
anybody,
that acronym.
no problem. So anybody who will be in a position like that, right? Within the GRC, you could even be in the governance side. So you're just running the policies and just helping create the operating model, like how the team is going to be run, right? And you have the risk, who's more into the risk management, risk assessment, risk analysis, and you have the compliance team, just making sure we're in compliance with regulatory requirement and any contractual obligations we have, right? So within all those phases, right, within all those pillars, within the G, R, and C, you don't operate in isolation. You don't operate as an island. So the key thing I would say for anybody here is relationships. And in addition to relationships, you got to understand like the bigger picture. Like, what kind of business do you have? Like, what kind of industry you have, right? Because even with in terms of compliance and the regulatory requirement, you got to understand the industry you're in. So if you're in the healthcare, you got to be, HIPAA compliant. If you're with the banking industry, FFIC, right? You got to know all those like regulatory requirements or compliance or frameworks that you got to go with, right? And so you got to be able to understand those requirements and how they translate into the business objectives, because sometimes people just want to grab all those frameworks and the requirement and just slap it on the company, right? But you got to find a way to tailor it. And tailoring it, that's where you work with people, because then your subject matter expertise in each of those areas, right? You're not going to be the expert in that. You may be an expert in understanding the requirement, but when it comes to actual execution of this requirement, you're not going to be the person. So that's where the relationship piece comes in, where you're able to establish a relationship and you're able to go to those guys when the time is needed for them to help you validate or validate the control and make sure it's operating effectively, right? So it's all the things. So in everything, everything I've said is about relationship. But in addition to relationship, you gotta understand the what you're doing, why you're doing it, and then how you're gonna get it done is where the relationship really helps you, because how is like that's the real work, and that's where the people come in. And so those would be some advice I'll give to people. Like in everything you do in life professionally, the key thing is your relationship. And people say your network is your net worth, right? So that's how I see it professionally.
So what I'm hearing is that security and specifically GRC, we might deal with technology, but technology is almost the accessory to the main core of it, which is people and being social. Um, I think one of the things too that you also said that resonated with me is being able to understand the business and being able to understand the people that you're working with. You need to do the legwork to figure out how it is that specific business unit or that leader functions and what
Hmm.
exactly their team does. Because thinking back to my past, especially during consulting, I think you could almost see the lack of, or you could see the respect leaving a person's body if I made a suggestion that went completely contrary to the way that their business operates, or that was just very, very textbook and took culture into zero consideration, where it might have met what the control stated, but from like a practical business application, it would ruin relationships. It wouldn't be able to be rolled out effectively. It would take too much time. The amount of effort versus the amount of risk reduction just didn't make any sense, or the amount of spend or resources wasn't aligned with, again, that risk reduction. So yeah, I think making sure that you're aware of the people that you're working with, you can communicate effectively with them, is the next level to getting them to know you as a person. So yeah, there's the personal aspect and then the business aspect.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And I've had those experiences, because I also started in my early career. I was, working, PricewaterhouseCoopers, PwC, right? So there are things that you do like where you go very textbook centric. So where you just look at, oh, you got to have a X, Y, and Z, right? So you go in there and go, you got to have X, Y, and Z, right? But you have to be able to contextualize everything you're doing within the business, right? And be able to understand like why you're doing it. If I should ask you for logs, right? You got to understand why do you need logs? Why do you need to be logging, right? Or if I actually ask you for like specific configuration settings, right? You got to understand why you're doing that, not just because the textbook is saying do it, all right? So it's very important as people who may be watching this. I'm not sure whatever level you're in your career, but if you come in an entry level and you think, oh, compliance or anything with GRC or anything is like, you get a list of requirements, you go and ask them, hey, what are you doing? Like, can I see evidence to meet this requirement? You got to find a way to tailor this requirement, because those requirements are usually best practices most of the time. They're not like the Bible, right? And I've seen companies who are really good in taking the best part of each of those, regulatory requirements. I've seen people who take you know, um, some part of ISO 2700, some part of like NIST cybersecurity framework. Because when you look at them, they all kind of lead to one thing at the end of the day, right? But they could
They're
be
all just
worded differently,
plagiarizing each other.
plagiarizing each other. And I think some is more based on like your international presence, right? So it's at the end of the day, you got to make it a point to understand like the why you need to have this control in place. That mindset needs to be there. And I've seen a lot of people, I've been audited by some people who you can tell like they're just reading from the textbook. In my head, I was like, okay, okay, okay. And sometimes like the human nature in me will be like, okay, I can tell you're a rookie, right? So, because I've been an auditor, I'll just try to help them out, so you can see a lot of
But not
situations like,
everybody's that nice.
yeah, not everyone is that nice, make sure you catch me on a good day with that. If I'm having a bad day, maybe I'm not being nice, or nicer, but it's very, very key for you not to just do things blindly or just following the book. Like, engineers and don't like that, and they'll, as you said, you just lose the respect right away. Like, once you lose the respect, it's hard to reestablish that.
I think one one good example I can think of from my own personal career is I remember when I was early in my career, I almost latched on to the concept of the cloud is just somebody else's computer, and it's like, all right, like yeah, there's validity to that, but also there's a lot of nuance that that's not capturing. And I remember one of the first times that I went into a very cloud native company and I started throwing around like, give me your server inventory, and I could just see like it was almost like their eyes couldn't roll back into their heads quick enough, and I was just like, oh no, like everything is
You know
off
what
to
you're
a bad
talking
start
about?
already. So being being able to know who you're talking to and use the right language, because the chances are they 100% knew what I was getting at, but
Hmm.
also the fact that I was using that language demonstrated that I didn't fully understand what it is I was auditing, which that didn't lend to my credibility. So yes, if there's a suggestion that I can have, yes, tailor the controls, but also know the proper language and lexicon of the people that you're speaking with.
Yeah, and then one thing I'll add, since we're on this topic, that I thought really helped me in my career, early stages of my career, is what I made it a point to really understand, like when I was working for PricewaterhouseCoopers, like if I'm gonna audit like an Active Directory, right? And I'm going in, I'm looking at the password policies and the log policies, and how groups and all the stuff are set, organizations are set, right? I made sure like I had I've done a simulation myself. So when you look at my laptop, I had a lot of different like virtual machines created for different type of operating systems, and as I learned, right, uh, it doesn't mean like as a GRC professional you have to be like super technical, but it's always good to almost like have those virtual environment or those virtual machines created so you can kind of walk through it. And one of the things that even when I was doing internal audit, they loved about me is like, give me read access to your database. That's all I need. And I knew how to run SQL query. I'll just plug in and run queries and I'll run report and I'll just ask you questions, right? And even when I work at PricewaterhouseCoopers, I learned how to use ACL, which is like a data, mining and analytics tool, right? And I used to run the analytics for our team before we even go like do financial audit. So you gotta find a way, not just learning and asking questions about requirement, but if you're able to add some skills to it, when you go into conversation, you gain a lot of respect and it makes it easier for you to move around. Because it helped me to move around, like when I was making like lateral movement, because people felt like, okay, I'm not just an auditor or something, but he's very technical also. So you can be put in a role where that will require you to have the technical ability to run that role.
So keeping in, I guess, some of the theme of management and people and leadership, it's bringing humanity to this kind of role within a business. Patrick, is there anything that you're working on personally that you'd like to plug on this? Because I think one of the things that I started out with doing with my team is like I'm going to screw up left and right when it comes to some of the textbook style of management stuff. But at the very least, I want to get to know you as people. I want you to know me as people. So is there anything you're working on outside of your 9 to 5 that you're proud of that kind of makes you who you are as a leader at your actual company?
Yeah, I actually offer like career mentorship and guidance to folks in my church. So there are people whom I'm always talking to when they have job interviews. They call me. So I've actually created a network of folks who just talk to me when they need any help. And also, I started impacting. So I started teaching like cloud engineering, even just on the side for folks who are trying to transition into that space, right? So I'm providing like entry level cloud, but it's very hands on. So you can, from my class, you can go take like the cloud practitioner or like the solutions architect associate. So those are some of the things I'm doing on the side. And I just feel like those are like really impacting people because I hear people's stories. So before I started this, I started talking to people. I hear the stories, like what they're doing currently, where they want to get to. And I just got emotionally drawn towards those stories. And I was like, what can I do to help? Like, because I got to where I'm in life right now because people helped me. right? So I feel like I have to reciprocate that type of love I got from folks. So in my personal life, I'm doing a lot of things like that where I even get random people on LinkedIn that I don't even know who just ping me, and I'll just call them and talk to them. Like I'm just that type of person. So yeah, so those are some of the things I'm doing on this side that makes me feel human.
And now also bringing this back to the very beginning of our conversation. If you're watching the video on this one, Patrick's got some in-ear monitors in there. You want to tell me a little bit about what you're doing musically and kind of how that's influenced your leadership style? I know we touched a little
Absolutely.
bit on it at the beginning, but just yeah, let me know what you're working on.
Yeah, so my wife and I, we are also working on music. My wife and I both sing. We go by their term need worship, so NEED, like need worship. So we already have some music out in the streaming platforms, Apple Music, Spotify, YouTube Music, don't play all over the streaming platforms. So that's something I do with my wife. It's something that brings me a lot of happiness because that's something we both connect on, even though we connect on different levels. But this is something we're both doing, and so yeah, we have music out there. We're working on an album release coming up soon. So folks who care about that, you can ping me and I can give you details. But yeah, to this in years, we use that when we go to perform in different places. So Mark picks on
Well,
picks
that's
on
all going
that
to be
for
in the
me.
show notes because Patrick's music is phenomenal. So I'll be sure to link all of that. But Patrick's made it very clear that he is open to mentoring and communicating. He is my mentor when it comes to leadership. What's the best way for people to get in contact with you?
Absolutely. So I'm on LinkedIn. I go by Patrick Ayertey. So Ayertey. And you can just ping me on LinkedIn. I'm also happy to share my information with you, like email address or my phone number. So if you connect with me on LinkedIn, I can share those information once we establish some level of trust and some level of next step that we have to embark upon. So yeah, I'm on Instagram. I'm on Facebook. You should just type my name. You see me on Instagram, Facebook. But since this is a professional thing, I'm definitely on LinkedIn. So just search for the name Patrick Ayertey. You can find me there, and then you can connect with me, and then we can take things from there.
And if you go out to the grcpodcast.com, this is all going to be within the show notes. So I will have links in there so everybody can easily get to you. Now, anything else, any other additional color on this particular topic that you like to add? Because I think in terms of my set list of questions, we've covered a lot. And in terms of your answers, they've covered a lot too. So I'm just going to leave the floor open to you. If there's anything else you'd like to add, feel free.
No, I think this has been great. This podcast has been great. And I just feel like in life, there's specific things, philosophies I go with in life, right? And you don't have to agree with me, but I'm all about the people, right? Because at the end of the day, we always have a saying like, if you want to go faster in life, you go alone. But if you want to go further in life, you got to go with like a team. Because the far you go, you're gonna get tired. So you're gonna need someone to help you. You're gonna need a hand, right? But if you wanna go fast, fast doesn't mean you're gonna go far in life. So speed doesn't equate like success. And I've seen a lot of people who just like, I want to be a VP. I want to do this. Like I want to like move very fast in life, and they're gonna do everything, burn bridges, like step on people's toes, like just cut corners and get there, right? But when you get there, how are you gonna sustain yourself? The sustenance at that level comes with the people around you, the trust, the circle of trust you have around you. And so if you're able to allow yourself to go through a process, right? It doesn't mean we shouldn't be ambitious in getting to where we want to get in life. But if you want to go very far in life, there's an element of people you have to depend on, people you can trust. Not everybody you gotta like depend on. You gotta figure out the people who you can trust, who have your best interest and advice and they can also you can also reciprocate that loyalty towards them, right? And that will help you go far in life because like where I'm at in life right now, I didn't get to where I'm at just by myself. It's just been I was there for people and people were there for me. And so when the opportunity comes, they'll just ping you, or when an opportunity comes, I ping them, right? So my only thing I'll say to leave people here is like we're all trying to get to somewhere in life, but there's specific things that we do in this life where it's very human centric, right? And we got to think about the human aspect of it. And we got to find a way to work with people, even if you don't like to work with people. It's better when you work with people and that'll push you to that next limit that you want to get to in life. Because as I said, if you want to go very fast, you go alone. But if you want to go far in life, find people you can trust, people who can hold each other accountable to get to that point. One of the things that's helped me is I've always had a circle of friends who we push each other and we hold each other accountable. They can tell like the painful truth. Like I feel like a lot of people nowadays don't have that. So if you want someone to really tell you the painful truth, which is like gets under your skin, but when you think about it, it's like, yeah, he's right. I gotta do something about it, right? Those are very important things to have in life, right? So I'm getting more on the human aspect and the philosophy. But when you add all those things to your personal drive and your career and your philosophy in life, it makes you a better person to work with and to be around. You can be a very great person, but you could be a great person and people don't want to be around you. And if that's what you want to do, that's great. But if you want to have people to be around you, it's great to work as a team. And even when you look at Maslow's theory of needs, right? You start from the security needs, social needs, you move to self-actualization. When you get to self-actualization, you want people to really understand you. You want people to recognize it. That's why you see people move careers and they get to a point, I just want to be a president. I want to be X, Y, and Z. I want to be on board because you want a level of recognition. And that's like thinking of a massive theory of needs, right? So in order to get there, you got to think about the relationship you're building and the people you have along that journey to get you to that spot. So when you're there, you're not lonely.
I think that's probably the perfect place to end this conversation on, bringing you right back to the humanity. Patrick, thank you again for all of the sage advice, and I will continue seeking your mentorship. And it was really great having you on the podcast.
Thank you, Mark, for the opportunity. This was great.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of the GRC podcast. We're releasing new episodes on the second and fourth Monday of every month, so be sure to mark your calendar. You can listen to us on Spotify, Apple, Google, or wherever you love to listen to your favorite podcasts. If you're enjoying the show, please take a moment to rate and leave a review. It really helps us reach more listeners like you. Don't forget to connect with us on our social media. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram under the handle @TheGRC Podcast or on LinkedIn by searching for the GRC Podcast Company page. This is a community-first podcast, so we'd love to hear your thoughts, your feedback, and suggestions for future episodes. Lastly, please make sure to visit our website, thegrcpodcast.com, where you can find show notes, behind the scenes, and exclusive content. Thanks for listening. Until next time.